Do you want to create a web-based chatbot? If the answer is yes, then this tutorial is for you. In this video, I'm going to show you how to create a chatbot using Python and Flask. You can integrate this chatbot in your Shopify store or in any other website that you might have. So let's start with the actual coding. We're going to need PyCharm. So let's create a new project and then we can start coding. So this is the project that I've already created. At the moment, it's completely empty and we're going to start creating files shortly. So let's start with creating a file called Chatbot, which will be the entry point of our application. Okay, and what we need here is basically we need the Flask API. So what is Flask? So Flask is a web framework which is used in Python, and it gives you the ability to create a website very easily without having to do a lot of setup and many complex things. So let's see if we can import it. And I believe we probably need to install it. So in this case, you just click on install package and then let's give it some time. So the package has been successfully installed. And now what we can do is we can actually create a web application with a single web page. And then we can use this as an example on how to create the chatbot and then add it to the web page. So once we have imported Flask, now we can create an actual application. And yeah, then we can use this application to define the actual pages which are going to be included in the application. So in our case, we're going to define an index page, which will be the main page that we're going to land on when we actually run the website. So we need to import render template. So this is rendering HTML templates. And let's say index.html. And finally, we need to actually run the application. Okay, so what we're missing now is just the index page. So let's go ahead and create this. So we need to create a new folder under the web chatbot demo. So this folder is going to be called templates. And then under templates, we're going to create a file called index. So this is the predefined HTML content, and then the title of this page will be index page. So if we run this now, then we should be able to see an empty page. So let's just quickly do that and see what happens. So now if you click on this, you should be able to see the page. As you can see, the title of the page is index page, and then the entire page is completely empty because we haven't added anything yet. So let's start with populating the index page so that we can actually create the chatbot widget. Okay, so in the body section, we're going to create a button. And then this button will be used to actually open up the chat box window. So we can give this button an ID, and we can say chat button, and the name of the button. So basically we're going to use an icon which will be displayed. So let's just quickly find an icon. So you can search for any kind of Unicode symbol, and then you can use this for your buttons. So in my case, I've searched for Unicode chat symbol, and I think I clicked on this one, speech balloon. So if we take a look at this one, you can see it's a nice balloon with a message. So what we need to do is we need to copy everything after this plus sign, and we need to go back to our PyCharm instance. So what we need to do is we need to paste the text that we just copied, and we also need to add the and sign followed by hash, and also we need to uh, add the letter X just before this. So now if we actually rerun the application, or actually let's set debug to true and rerun the application, because what this is going to do is it's going to refresh the contents of the page without me having to rerun the application over and over again. So now if we click on this, yeah, you can see that now we have this balloon icon, and this is the button basically. So currently it doesn't do anything, but we're going to implement the functionality so that this button comes down to the bottom right hand corner, and then when you click on it, it should bring up the chat box window. So how do we do that? We go back to the index page, and we need to add some more code to make this possible. So we need to add an action listener to this button so that when we click it, something actually happens. Say we can define a function called toggle chat. And yeah, let's just quickly define this function. So the script contains all the JavaScript functions, and in our case we just we just specified a function called toggle chat. So now we need to create this function, so we can write the functionality behind this function later on. So let's now create the actual chat window, which will be displayed once we click on the button. So we want to create a bunch of div containers, and then the main container will be the chat container. So within this chat container, we're going to have multiple other containers. Then the first container is going to be chat header. So this will hold the top bit of the chat window, so it can display any name, or you can add the minimize icon or the close icon, so you can click on that. So we can also add an action listener here, and say, for example, when the user clicks on the header, then we're going to close the chat. So, okay. Yes, we need to give it some text as well. So I can say Chatbot, and if we click on that, we're going to close the chat window. So after the chat header, we're going to define the actual chat box, which will contain the text. So let's just say that's the chat box. And finally, we're going to have the actual controls, like the input field and the send button. So we can say chat input container, and then this container is going to contain the input field and a button. So this is going to be input, and we can give it some ID, say for example user input, and we can also give it a placeholder. Okay, and then we can create a button, so when the user clicks on this button, then they will send a message. So we give it an ID, and then we need to define an action listener. So let's see. So we can define an action listener called send message. So when the user clicks on this button, then we actually send the message. Okay, so I think we pretty much have all the containers and all the functionality apart from JavaScript. So now we actually need to add some JavaScript so that we can make this functional, because currently we just have the HTML elements, but then without JavaScript, they're not going to do anything. They're just static elements. So the first function which we defined in JavaScript is toggle chat. So this is supposed to show or hide the chat box window. So let's just define the actual functionality for this. So what we want to do is we want to get the chat container, and then the chat container is this div container that we just created a moment ago. So when we get the actual chat container, we want to say that the style should be changed, and we want to say that if the chat window is already on the screen, then we can hide it. If it's not there, then we want to display it. So how do we do this? So this is the chat container, and then we can check if the chat window is displayed or not. If it's not, then we're going to display this. So in this case, we're just changing the style of this container. So if the chat container is not shown on the screen, then we say that this should be displayed. Otherwise, if it's displayed, then we want to hide it. And that's pretty much the functionality of this function. So what we need to do next is we need to define another function, which is send message. So this function will be responsible for sending a message to the backend functionality and get an actual message. So we're going to use ChatGPT to get a response back and then show that to the user. And yes, so let's see how we can do that. So first we need to get the user input from the input box. So the ID of the input box is this one, user input. And we just want to make sure that the user input is actually populated before we send the message to the backend. This is just to ensure that we don't send empty messages, because we're not going to get any response back, I would assume. And what do we want to do next is basically when we send the message, we actually want to add the message to the chat container so that we can see that. So how do we do that? So we get the actual chat box, and then we need to add an element inside, and this element will be basically a paragraph which contains the text that we just typed in. So let's just say this is a paragraph, and we want to say u equals and then the actual user input. And finally, we want to set the user input to none because the user is going to type another message later on. So how do we do this? We get the element and then we say that the value of this element is actually empty. And what we need to do next is we actually need to send a query to the backend using the message so that we get a response back. So we're going to use the AJAX function, which is called fetch. So let's see, how do we write this? So we basically need to define an endpoint called getResponse. And this is going to be a post request because we're going to send some data. Let's provide some headers. Basically, the content type should be application JSON. And then finally, we need to pass the actual body. So in our case, the body is going to be the actual user message that we've typed in. So that's going to be the user input. Actually, we don't need this. And what we want to say is that when we get some data back, we want to process the response. And we want to extract the message from the response and show it back to the user. So we have two then statements. And the first one is just going to get the JSON response, and then the second one is actually going to process the data, and then we need to basically add this into the chat window. So how do we do this? We want to add another element inside the chat box. And in this case, it's going to be the assistant. So data, we want to get the response from the data. And what we want to do as well is we need to make sure that we actually scroll to the bottom of the chat window just to make sure that the user can see the message. So how do we do this? We get the chat box window and then we say scroll top equals, and then we get the same element and then we get the scroll height. So this is to ensure that we actually scroll to the bottom of the chat window. So let's see if we have the correct brackets. So we've got a closing bracket for this one, closing bracket for this one, and finally we have this. I'm not sure if we need this bracket. Okay, so okay, yeah, I think we missed some brackets along the way. I think this one. Okay. So yeah, I think this should be sufficient. And once we have this, let's go back to the actual Python code and define this function getResponse. So this function will be responsible for querying ChatGPT. So it's going to get the user message, send that to ChatGPT, and then it's going to return a response. So let's go back. So in here we want to define a new endpoint, and this is going to be called getResponse. So we want to extract the user message. So we need to import request, and then we get JSON, and then we get the user message. All right. We need to define some headers for the ChatGPT query or the OpenAI query. So we want to pass the authorization. In this case, it's going to be a token. So API key, I'm going to define this shortly. And we need to make sure that the content type is JSON. All right, and finally we want to actually send a request. So we probably need to import the requests API or requests library. So let's just install this. And while we are waiting for it to finish, we can actually start writing the actual request. So this is going to be a post request. And we want to actually query ChatGPT. So this is the endpoint for ChatGPT. And then after this, we want to pass the headers. And finally, we want to pass a JSON body. So in the JSON body, we need to specify the model that we want to use from OpenAI. In our case, we want to use the GPT 4o mini. And then we need to pass messages. And finally, maximum number of tokens. So in our case, let's say that this row is user, and then the content will be the message that the user typed in. And finally, we actually need to get the reply from ChatGPT and then return it back to the user. So how do we do this? So I can say chatbot reply equals response equals to response, then we get the JSON, and then we need to get the choices. We want to get the first choice, we get the message, and then finally the content of this message. So we want to return a JSON response, so let's import the JSONify utility, and then from here what we want to do is we want to say that the response is actually the chatbot reply. So now what we're missing is just the API key. So let's just define this up here. So you can use your own API key. I'm going to revoke this key at the end of this video, so don't try and copy and paste it. Okay, so now we have everything, and what we can do is we can just rerun the application just to see how far we are so far. So let's just do this. All right, the application is up and running. If we refresh the page, okay, so you can see the chat button, then we have the chat header, we've got the input text and then the button. So now if we click on this button a few times, then you can see that everything gets hidden and then it gets displayed if we click on it again. So what we want to do next is we basically want to add some CSS just to customize the look and feel of this form. So ideally we want to put everything in the bottom right hand corner, and we want to make sure that it looks nice and appealing to people. Okay, so now we're going back to PyCharm, and if we go back to the index page, what we want to do is we want to define a new section just under the title, and then this is going to be called style, and then the style is basically going to hold all the functionality which is used to change the appearance of all the buttons and all the input fields. So let's start with modifying the actual chat button. So in our case, we want to say that this button is going to be positioned in the bottom right hand corner. And yeah, so we're basically tweaking the font size, the height, the width, the borders, the color, and yeah, so you will see how it looks very shortly. After this, we want to modify the appearance of the chat container. So by default, the chat container is not going to be displayed, and we want to make sure that the background of the container is white because this is going to be like the chat history. And yeah, so what we need next is we need to define some style for the chat window header. And yeah, so this is just going to be like background color, then color of the text that appears inside the header, and we want to make sure that the text is aligned in the center. And after this, what we want is basically, let me just copy and paste everything that I've defined so far, and I'll just walk you through all the different styles. So this is the chat box window. So the chat box window is going to have like 300 pixels height. Then we've got the chat input container, which contains the input box and the actual button for sending the messages. Then we've got the user input, that's again the input box, and then this is the send button. And this is just to make sure that we can distinguish between the different messages between the user and ChatGPT. So the user is going to have their messages aligned to the right, and the messages will have blue color, whereas the bot, its messages are going to be aligned to the left, and the messages will have green color. So now if we go back to the index page, if we refresh this, you can see now we have a very nice button in the bottom right hand corner. Now if we click on this button, we will see the chat header. Then this is the chat box, like this white box here is the chat box, and then at the bottom we've got the chat input container, so it contains two elements. the input box and then this send button. So what we can do now is we can test the functionality just to make sure that we can actually send a message. We can see it in the chat box, and then we need to ensure that we actually get a response back from ChatGPT. Okay, so let's type a message. In our case, it's going to be hello world. Let's send this. And as you can see, we sent a message and we got a response back. So let's see, who are you? And as you can see now, we're actually chatting directly with OpenAI. So for some reason, the actual colors do not work for the chatbot. So let me go back and see how we can fix this. So if we go back to the index page, I think we need to define some classes. Yeah, you can see here we define the classes in the style, but then we're not using the actual classes when we create the messages and we add them to the chat box. So let's just find this. Yeah, so in here you can see we need to add a class, and then this class is going to be user. And then down here, this is going to be class bot. So now if we go back, let's refresh this page and let's type this. So yeah, there you go. So now we have actually fixed the colors and the alignment of the text. So again, if we ask this question, who are you? You will see that we basically send messages and we get responses back almost instantly without any delays. So this is pretty much the end of this video. If you found it useful, please like the video, subscribe to the channel. If you want to get access to the code behind this tutorial, you can join my school community. It's completely free. The link should be down below in the description. And you'll also get access to all of my Python templates and any kind of templates that I come up with as part of the videos that I create. So thank you very much for your time and see you in the next video.